He was obsessed with Jodie Foster and thought, here's the way I can get her attention.
He was being seen by a psychiatrist, and he was lying to the psychiatrist.
His fantasy world had become his normal. By the time he was delusional, it was almost too late. There was no stopping him.
Taxi Driver really put Jodie Foster on the in-demand list.
Hollywood's a roller coaster town. It's either the best ride of your life or the worst ride of your life, depending on how you deal with it.
Hinckley traveled to Yale University and began contacting Jodie Foster, sending her letters, calling her on the telephone.
He's like, what are people laughing at? She says, they're laughing at you.
One of the things we've learned is you don't talk to your stalker. We see Hinckley buying weapons. We also see these various events coming together, the increasing obsession with Jodie Foster. He came to believe that he could win her love by assassinating a public figure.
There's no bigger person to hit than the President of the United States. Pulls out his gun and unleashes 6 shots in 1.7 seconds. Reagan falls like a dead weight into the arms of his agents. Get him out!
1981. Jodie Foster, a child star since the age of 3, turns away from the spotlight of Hollywood and attends Yale. As she attempts to blend in with her classmates, John Hinckley Jr., a lost soul with serious mental health issues, is desperate for her attention. And now, his bubbling insanity has led him a few feet from the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. Armed with a gun, Hinckley is about to make history. Del Quinton Wilbur is the author of Raw High Down, the near assassination of Ronald Reagan.
He says, I wonder how close I can get with my gun. Because you see, this was not the first time he had thought about killing the president to impress Jodie Foster.
1 hour prior, in a seedy hotel room, John Hinckley Jr. writes a final demented letter to the object of his potentially lethal obsession.
Dear Jodie, there is a definite possibility that I will be killed in my attempt to get Reagan. It is for this reason I'm writing you this letter now. I feel very good about the fact that you at least know my name and know how I feel about you.
Standing a few feet away from President Reagan, Hinckley prepares to release a string of shots.
As Reagan's leaving, he's surrounded by his Secret Service agents. And John Hinckley says, you know what, I'm gonna see if I can do this right now. I'm gonna do this. He pulls out his gun and unleashes 6 shots in 1.7 seconds.
Several people are struck down, including President Ronald Reagan.
Within seconds of the shooting, they jumped on him. They grabbed him, subdued him, and threw him in the back of a squad car and raced him to DC Police Headquarters.
Stuart Johnson is appointed by the court as the public defender for John Hinckley.
They did not know if there was more than one shooter or a co-conspirator. Was Mr. Hinckley, John Hinckley, part of a group?
Jerry Parr's in the back of the limousine. His first job is to assess the president. He puts Reagan up on the seat, runs his hands up and down his side in his suit, face. Are you okay, Mr. President? You doing all right?
When I first heard of that President Reagan had been shot and wounded, I guess my first thought was, how badly injured is he? And, you know, who could have done this?
John Hinckley Jr. has finally got the attention of the woman he has hounded since he saw her on screen in Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. But years earlier, in 1955, Hinckley appears to be a fairly typical child. His turn as one of the most infamous men in history marks an unbelievable departure from his privileged upbringing.
John Hinckley Jr. was the son of a wealthy couple. Dad was heavily involved in oil.
He lived in Texas, he grew up in Dallas, and then later his family moved to Evergreen, Colorado, because his dad wanted to be near the mountains. He had an older brother, sister was the youngest. They were very successful, high-achieving people, and I think Hinckley always felt a little overshadowed.
Hinckley struggled. He struggled with his relationships, he struggled at school, but he had a taskmaster as a father who he always disappointed in his father's eyes. Yet his mother would find a reason to support him and not be critical of him and excuse his shortcomings.
His mother said he missed his junior-senior prom. He skipped it because he didn't have a date. and she said that was one of the saddest moments of her life.
So we have the picture being painted of a black sheep in the family who felt he could not win his dad's approval.
The biggest concern, I think, with John Hinckley Jr. is it started early. The family was reporting in middle school and high school he started to withdraw at an extreme level. And we know that that's one of the prodromal symptoms of schizophrenia. It's hard to identify that in teenagers because withdrawing can be a normal part of development for adolescents.
Hinckley's behavior, though, was not just a phase. In fact, it was the beginning of his unraveling.
He was just a real loner. He went to Texas Tech, and no one really remembers him very well from there. There were some reports that people saw what his room looked like, and it was just like a litter of like fast food wrappers everywhere.
Hinckley also began to isolate himself, spending more time alone. We have this phenomenon of a failure in the terrestrial world means you begin to withdraw into your own fantasies, spend more time alone, isolate. One of the things that's notable about this case is this was pre-internet, this is pre-social media. So he didn't have those to withdraw to. He could only just withdraw into himself.
Hinckley is a child of privilege from a happy marriage, plagued by personal demons. A total juxtaposition. Jodie Foster is the product of a rapidly deteriorating marriage. Raised solely by her mother, she manages to become one of the biggest movie stars in the world.
Jodie Foster grew up in Hollywood, just blocks away from Hollywood proper, Hollywood Boulevard, and became involved in the industry as a child.
She actually had an older brother that was in the acting world. That Jodie Foster's mom took her son on an audition, and she didn't want to leave Jodie Foster in the car, so she took her along with her. And her brother was auditioning, doing this role for a commercial, and Jodie Foster was in the background, like making strong woman faces. So the crew was crackling up like this little kid is entertaining us, and they actually ended up booking her, and her first gig was a Coppertone commercial, and that's where her career took off.
As part of the classic ad campaign, a young Jodie plays in the sun.
Maybe one of the most famous commercials ever. It's an image that has been around for decades now, but it's very recognizable for Coppertone. That is an iconic image when she was just 3 years old.
Leif Garrett is a former child star that grew up to be the quintessential teen idol in the 1970s. As kids in Hollywood, he and Jodie ran in the same circles.
The very first time I met Jodie Foster was when my sister had worked with her on some television show and invited her to her birthday party the next day, and she came over for the birthday party. Jodie was just one of those really intelligent, cool tomboy girls who she's ready to play soccer or to climb a tree.
I think early on in her career, until after making 40 commercials or so, her mother said, "No more. You're not going to become a Hollywood brat. I'm going to keep you at home. You go to school, you have a normal childhood to a certain extent, but you have chores to do. You have to stay grounded." She was a very in-demand young actor with, I don't think, any real aspirations towards becoming a professional actress.
Despite her mother's attempts at a typical childhood for her young daughter, Jodie Foster continues to act. She catches the world's attention with a series of startling performances even before she's a teenager.
In 1974, she is cast by Martin Scorsese in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, but her most famous movie with Martin Scorsese would also be her most controversial film.
The 1976 release of Martin Scorsese's soon-to-be classic film Taxi Driver changes the life not only of Foster, but of Hinckley too. When Hinckley sees the film, she becomes the object of obsession with devastating consequences. Los Angeles, 1975. Jodie Foster is continuing to thrive and reach new heights in her career. Under the watchful eye of her mother, she is becoming the talk of Hollywood.
By the time Jodie Foster was appearing on television, when she would do episodic television, she was getting twice the amount of money as almost anybody else.
Jodie's career was literally everything. She was so in demand as a young actress.
She was a complete professional at an age when most people are still trying to figure out their math tables.
Soon enough, the movies come calling. In 1972, Jodie Foster makes her film debut opposite Michael Douglas in Napoleon and Samantha.
Her work when she was younger was her best work. Never seen something more natural in my life. She was an amazing amazingly natural, wonderful actress.
In 1976, Jodie Foster's career ricochets to the A-list, playing 12-year-old child prostitute Iris opposite Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. The film makes her a star, but it draws the attention of John Hinckley, who is becoming further unhinged and mentally unstable.
People were upset once they saw the film because the end of the movie is very violent, it's very graphic, and she's in some of those scenes. People didn't think that was right.
With its frank graphic content, sexually volatile material, and mesmerizing performances, Taxi Driver is a phenomenon.
Previous to that, though, previous to the casting of her, she had to go through psychological testing just to make sure that playing a prostitute on screen wouldn't damage her forever. And she said, listen, I grew up in Hollywood, about 3 blocks away from, where all the prostitutes line up on Hollywood Boulevard. I saw girls like Iris every single day as I was growing up.
The role garners the first series of Academy Award nominations for Jodie Foster.
I think being nominated for an Academy Award at age 14 brings with it a lot of pressure that any other actor may have cracked under. But because Jodie Foster had been raised by her mother to do chores around the house, to be as much of a regular person as possible in a very confusing and complex industry, I think she remained grounded after the Taxi Driver nomination.
Her career literally took off and was like a whirlwind of craziness.
While Jodie Foster is on top of the world, John Hinckley Jr. is quickly losing his grip on reality. His life is beginning to unravel, and he is slipping deeper and deeper into the world of delusion and mental illness.
John Hinckley thought he could be a songwriter. He came from a very wealthy family, had a lot of prospects in his life, and he thought, hey, I want to be a songwriter. And he went out to LA, tried to be a songwriter, totally failed at it.
He has problems connecting with other people. He has problems keeping friends, performing in school. All of these things start to add up and get worse as he gets older. That being said, by the time he had a full-blown schizophrenia, by the time he was delusional, it was almost too late. There was no stopping him.
Hinckley's family, aware that something is not quite right with their son, takes him to see psychiatrist Dr. John Hopper.
Hopper attempted to treat Hinckley. The record indicates that he attempted to treat his problems with depression and anxiety and his narcissistic personality disorder with a minor tranquilizer called Valium that does not appear to have made any difference. And subsequent to that, the treatment focus that Dr. Hopper recommended to Hinckley's dad was that he be given strict limits about whether he would be given any money, whether he would return to live at home, and this was referred to as tough love. In retrospect, the father has said that he wishes that he had not taken this approach with his son, that it did not work.
I don't know that any of that would have mattered. John Hinckley Jr.'s symptoms, his disorder, overrode all of that. He couldn't connect well at all to his family. It seems like John Hinckley Jr.'s father expected him to go to college, which was why he enrolled in school, but he couldn't complete school at all. He couldn't perform because of his symptoms. I don't know that it would have mattered what kind of father he had.
What drew John Hinckley Jr. to Jodie Foster was her aspirations as an actress and her successes. Most notably in the movie Taxi Driver. It's reported that Hinckley saw that movie at least 15 times and became fascinated with it and the characters in it. 2 are prominent. One was Travis Bickle, who was portrayed in the film by Robert De Niro as a very reclusive, paranoid, odd taxi driver. And the other character that he became fascinated with was Jodie Foster, playing a young prostitute in the film. And together, these characters began to shape the fantasy of his pursuit.
It seemed like at that time in his life, he was looking for something to hold on to. He had joined a neo-Nazi group. I think this happened at a time when he was looking for something to help provide meaning and structure in his life. The fact that he was kicked out of a neo-Nazi group for being too extreme and uncontrollable shows me that he was capable of very, very extreme emotions, things that we don't know that he showed to his family or people that knew him before. He was starting to obsess about different topics, and seeing the movie Taxi Driver might have just happened at the right time for him, where he then became obsessive about the characters in the movie and even started modeling himself after the main character.
The fantasy was that he identified as Travis Bickle.
Now, John Hinckley related to Travis because he did have a dark side, but Jodie Foster brought that soft side of him. I'm gonna take care of her. She's gonna be my responsibility.
According to the experts, the traits of Hinckley's fixation are not uncommon among stalkers.
In many of the public figure assassins and attackers, and also stalkers of public figures, we will see a rescue component. In those that are not intent on hurting the object of their affection, who's a public figure, they will typically triangulate, and there will be a third party that they believe is out to hurt the public figure, and the public figure must be rescued from those that are attempting to hurt. The triangulation in this case is a bit different in the sense that there was no evidence that John Hinckley in his writings believed that Jodie Foster was under some kind of a threat, yet he triangulated by bringing in a public figure that if he assassinated that public figure, he would then elevate his status and somehow win her affection. Crazy on the surface, but from a psychological perspective in his mind, a way to cement his historical significance and his connection to her. I think what attracted Hinckley to Bickle, if I can speculate, is that Travis Bickle as a character was estranged from society. He was alone. He didn't trust other people. He was yearning for some kind of connection. He was attempting to establish in the movie a close relationship with another young woman in the film who was acted by Sybil Shepherd. And when that failed, then began to develop the relationship with this young prostitute played by Jodie Foster.
Hinckley's deranged obsession with Foster is rapidly coming to a horrific resolution.
At this point, for the past couple of years, Hinckley has been learning how to shoot a gun. He's been, sort of almost getting ready to execute a plan that's probably been rolling around in his head ever since he saw Taxi Driver.
In 1980, John Hinckley Jr. is embarking on a deranged quest to infamy. He is hoping to capture the attention of actress Jodie Foster by committing the most heinous of acts.
Jodie Foster played a taxi driver in 1976. With that comes fans, admiration, a lot of accolades. But one of the downfalls of that is that John Hinckley Jr. became enamored with Jodie Foster. He watched Taxi Driver over and over again, and he became consumed with Jodie Foster to find out where she was, where she lived.
By the time Jodie Foster decided to go to Yale, she is 18 years old. She is a 15-year veteran of show business. She has been nominated for an Academy Award. I think at that point, she just wanted a break.
Hinckley set out in his pursuit of Jodie Foster to befriend her and form a relationship with her. And the course of that pursuit took him to Yale University. At the same time, Jodie Foster enrolled as a freshman.
Hinckley's fixation with Jodie Foster consumes his life. He sees himself in the role played by Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver, and he begins wearing Army surplus fatigue jackets and combat boots. This is yet another example of his deteriorating mental state.
He lied to his parents about it. He said he'd gotten into the Yale writing program. In reality, he was staying at like some hotel, dive hotel. Mom stalking her around. And in his mind, he wanted to impress her. He thought he could rescue her, like Bickle did in the movie.
And without telling anybody of his obsession, Hinckley traveled to Yale University and began contacting Jodie Foster.
Hinckley's delusions of a relationship with Foster are beginning to manifest into reality.
And he left notes and poems in her door, and he kind of expected it to be like a magical moment with her. And it was totally demoralizing. It was the exact opposite.
I think in one of his writings, in one of the letters, he actually wrote how hard it was for him to approach her. He had a sense of embarrassment and didn't want to be revealed. And I think we can all relate to that feeling of you like someone, but you don't quite want to say it because you're afraid of that rejection. And that's a very common, basic human thing to feel. So alongside of his poor judgment and irrational thinking and inability to distinguish reality from delusion or reality from fantasy, he also had a lot of real feelings going on that caused him, I think, a lot of chaos internally.
So he called her, and he identified himself as the person who's been leaving the notes in your box for 2 days. And she responded, "Am I supposed to know you?" And he said, "No, but we have a lot in common. Jodie, listen." And she said, "Yes, I just want to talk to you. Is that okay? Can we just talk?" And she said, "I'm not really supposed to talk to people I don't know."
Hinckley is relentlessly stalking Foster and becoming more delusional. He is living a few blocks away from her dorm room and bragging to anyone who will listen that he is her boyfriend.
In those days, very little was known about stalking. One of the things we've learned since then is if you are being stalked, you don't talk to your stalker. You don't have any conversations with them, if at all possible. She did on several occasions, which tends to reinforce the behavior. And it tends to establish in the mind of the stalker that there's either the hope of a relationship or even there's actually a relationship that's forming.
He tape recorded the phone calls, and he can hear laughing in the background of these phone calls. He's like, what are people laughing at? She says, "They're laughing at you, deeply wounded." Another call, she got his name wrong.
What's important is that he's talking to her, not what she's saying. She rebuffed him. He eventually began to not contact her. However, we had several other aspects of this developing, and that was his identification with Travis Bickle, his imitation of Bickle as a potential political assassin, his interest in weapons, and his purchase of weapons, 3 handguns.
I think what is ironic about John Hinckley Jr. is that he came along at a time when she had stepped away from the very thing that drew him to her in the first place, which is show business. She was trying to have a normal life, and all of a sudden her life has turned completely upside down.
Jodie Foster shares the letters with her college dean, and they are in turn given to both the campus police and New Haven police. The notes are considered harmless, and that's that.
We can only imagine how Jodie Foster felt. I believe that a lot of people that are stalked feel violated. It's analogous to being raped. It's very scary. She had no idea who this man was, how much he knew about her, or what he was willing to do. And it's all of those unknowns that cause people, I think, the greatest amount of fear.
Oftentimes, the tipping point in these cases is the beginning of what we refer to as the pathway. And that is that the individual, oftentimes through a personal grievance, has decided that the only alternative to solve their problem is violence. And then once they've made that decision, then they take tactical steps to decide who their targets are going to be, how they're going to carry out the attack, and whether they need to develop the capability to do so.
The family had recognized that he was about to do something terrible, I believe is what the brother said, and they had no way to intervene. He was not going to cooperate with them for treatment, even if they had gotten good advice from their family psychiatrist, which, by the way, they did not, obviously. He would have been incredibly resistant to treatment.
In the fall of 1980, there seems to be no turning back as Hinckley descends into absolute madness.
One of the ways that's manifest is when weapons are bought and the individual begins to practice. Oftentimes that is done in secret. So we see Hinckley buying weapons where we see these various events coming together. The increasing obsession with Jodie Foster, the identification, the increasingly intense identification with Travis Bickle, and then the fact that he was not getting the kind of social supports from the family that he had depended upon. And I think all those variables contributed to a perfect storm that launched him into 1980.
By that time, his fantasy world had become his normal. That was his real. It was what gave him structure and purpose in his life, and his purpose was to be Jodie Foster's boyfriend. He didn't have that in reality.
Hinckley begins to acquire guns and comes to the deranged conclusion that the way to impress Jodie Foster is to assassinate the President of the United States.
I don't know why John Hinckley Jr. felt like violence was the only answer. I don't know why he thought a grand gesture of violence was going to get her attention or was going to be something that she would see as endearing. Why would she then agree to be his girlfriend because he committed an act of violence? I think that speaks to John Hinckley Jr.'s inability to see the difference between reality and connect with other people, what other people would call normal or rational behavior. He had no judgment in that area whatsoever.
One of the key things that we've learned from the John Hinckley case that is still very, very true is that most assassins and attackers of public figures plan and prepare carefully for their attack. Secondly, most of them are fixated on the public figure. 3, they tend to identify with assassins and attackers that have preceded them. They want to be like them, but at the same time, they want to do better than they did. Oftentimes meaning that the number of victims are greater, or they're doing something that's innovative that will be remembered.
In October 1980, John Hinckley sets to track down and murder then-President Jimmy Carter.
He went to Dayton, Ohio, where Jimmy Carter was giving a rally, and got within arm's reach of Carter. Arm's reach of Jimmy Carter. And why didn't he shoot Carter? He left his guns at the bus depot. He didn't have his weapons. He goes to Nashville, stalks Carter again. Something in Hinckley's mind changes. He says, I think I'm gonna go to Connecticut to see Jodie instead. And he leaves, and as he's going through the airport, they find his gun on the x-ray machine, take it, confiscate it, basically arrest him. And in the end, he gets a $62 fine. That was it.
And he posted it and never came back. He never appeared for his next court appearance. He just kept moving. He should have been held, because why does someone have all that at the airport? And by the way, President Carter happens to be in the city. He should have been held.
He would have killed Carter, I think, if he had had his weapons, perhaps, or if it took him time to get up the nerve to do it, maybe. I don't know. I just know that a lot of what happened on March 30th was just chance, too. Like, what if he had arrived a day earlier?
As Hinckley prepares to gun down a sitting president for the sake of his detrimental obsession, another deranged fan commits a heinous act of violence.
4 months before Hinckley would attempt the assassination of Reagan, Mark David Chapman killed John Lennon. And as we know in public figure assassins, they often study very carefully assassins that have preceded them, and they want to emulate them, but they also want to do one better.
John Hinckley's mind is descending into a pit of despair and paranoia. His deadly obsession with Jodie Foster is in a collision course with history, and there is no turning back.
In a strange case of life imitating art rather than the other way around, John Hinckley Jr. looked at Taxi Driver as almost, I guess, a manifesto. He was obsessed with Jodie Foster and thought, here's the way I can get her attention, and he was going to try and assassinate the president, Ronald Reagan.
While gearing up for this act of violence, another psychopath commits a senseless act of murder. In December 1980, Mark David Chapman cold-heartedly kills John Lennon.
I think he identified with Chapman as an assassin that had preceded him down the path that he was hoping to take, and that from the perspective of a narcissistic personality, he wanted to both be like him and he wanted to outdo him. We also saw, as an additional kind of literary wrinkle, both Hinckley as well as Mark David Chapman were compelled by the writing that was in Catcher in the Rye. They both identified with Holden Caulfield, who was an adolescent filled with angst in that particular novel. In fact, they both had these books with them, either on their person or in their apartment, in their possession, when they carried out these assassinations.
Hinckley has spent months preparing for this moment. If he wants to be notorious, he has to go through with his plan. He makes his way to Washington, D.C.
He spends the night at the Park Central Hotel, $47 that night, lists himself as a student, sleeps, gets up, go get some Egg McMuffin sandwich at McDonald's, comes back and picks up a newspaper, the Washington Star. And on A4, he sees the president's schedule. And he sees the president's going to be speaking at 2 p.m. He says, I wonder how close I can get with my gun. Because you see, this was not the first time he had thought about killing the president to impress Jodie Foster.
John Hinckley writes one final demented letter to the object of his obsession.
He writes, Dear Jodie, there is a definite possibility that I will be killed in my attempt to get Reagan. At least you know I'll always love you. Jodie, I would abandon the idea of getting Reagan in a second if it could only win your heart and I could live out the rest of my life with you, whether it be in total obscurity or whatever. I will admit it to you that the reason I'm going ahead with this attempt now is because I just cannot wait any longer to impress you.
March 30th, 1981 is an ordinary day in Washington, D.C. The recently elected Ronald Reagan is watching his popularity wane as his approval ratings plunge further south than any president at this point in their term.
March 30th, 1981 was an absolutely ordinary day for everybody involved. It was cloudy, typical March day in Washington, D.C. Reagan had only one event of significance really on his schedule, and it was a speech to an AFL-CIO trade union at the Washington Hilton Hotel.
At approximately 1:45 p.m., Ronald Reagan and his presidential motorcade arrive at the Hilton.
They had visited the Washington Hilton Hotel more than 100 times with the President of the United States since it had been built. More than 100 times. So it's routine. Oh, we're just going to the Hilton? They put their vests away. None of the men on the Secret Service detail were wearing bulletproof vests.
There were a lot of Metropolitan Police and Secret Service surrounding the president, but he had to walk 15 feet out of the awning over the Washington Hilton before he could get into his limousine.
A lot of bystanders showed up. That's where Hinckley was. So he brought his little gun with him, a .22 caliber revolver with 6 Devastator bullets. And as Reagan's leaving, he's surrounded by his Secret Service agents. And John Hinckley says, you know, I think I'm gonna see if I can do this right now. I'm gonna do this. He pulls out his gun and unleashes 6 shots. The first shot hits Jim Brady, the press secretary, in the head, and he falls to the ground. The second shot hits Tom Delahanty, a DC police officer, in the back. He falls to the ground. The way to Reagan should be clear, but Jerry Parr, 50-year-old head of the Secret Service detail, is already reacting. Jerry Parr shoves Reagan into the back of the limousine, and a Secret Service agent, Tim McCarthy, who turned in a blocking stance to take a bullet for the president. The third shot goes high. It misses. Fourth shot hits Tim McCarthy, the Secret Service agent, in the chest, not wearing a bulletproof vest. He falls to the ground. The fifth shot slams against the armored glass of the limousine door as Jerry Parr and Reagan flash behind it. And the sixth shot, no one knows at the time where the sixth shot went. By that time, it slapped against the side of the limousine, slipped through a gap that wide between the door and the door frame, and struck Reagan in the left side. The driver of the car slams down the accelerator. Jerry Parr's in the back of the limousine. His first job is to assess the president. He puts Reagan up on the seat, runs his hands up and down his side in his suit, face. Are you okay, Mr. President? You doing all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Might have hurt my rib. 30 seconds later, Reagan's still complaining of a lot of pain in his back and chest, not feeling so good. He's like, Jerry, I don't know. So by getting Reagan out of the way in 4/10 of a second, if Jerry Parr's a split second slow, Reagan gets that bullet in the head, not the side.
President Reagan is screaming in pain, and he is rushed to emergency.
Parr doesn't know if they have other assassins laying in wait. Is this a decapitation strike? This is the middle of the Cold War.
The president arrives at the hospital 3 minutes later and collapses to the ground.
Eyes rolled in the back of the head. There's not a doctor or nurse I interviewed who thought Reagan was going to make it in those critical moments. So they take him to surgery. After several hours of probing, they finally find the bullet. And it's an inch from his heart. This bullet was just an inch from his heart. They take it out.
While Reagan recovers, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy also rebounds. D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty is left with permanent nerve damage, while White House press secretary James Brady fares the worst. He is paralyzed from the gunshot wound to the head, Brady spends his remaining days advocating for stricter gun control.
It became clear that the defendant apparently had done the shooting because he was jumped on right after the 6 shots.
They take him to the homicide office, and they leave him downstairs. And there's this grizzled homicide detective who comes across, he heard the president been shot, he goes down to get the suspect. And he sees this guy who's dressed as this preppy kid, thatch of blonde hair, totally blank face, not an emotion on it. And he could not believe that this was the guy who shot the president.
The dominant diagnosis in this case, which is a matter of public record, is narcissistic personality disorder. And we see pathological narcissism oftentimes in cases, particularly of attackers on public figures. And oftentimes they want something, they're seeking something, sometimes that involves fame and attention.
So Myers puts the report into the typewriter and is going through and says, he's doing the report, and he asks him, so how do you spell assassinate? And Hinckley goes, I know, I'll spell it for you. And he does.
In Hinckley's hotel room, investigators discover a postcard which depicts Ronald and Nancy Reagan, and it is addressed to Jodie Foster. It states, quote, "Dear Jodie, don't they make a darling couple? Nancy is downright sexy. One day you and I will occupy the White House, and the peasants will drool with envy. Until then, please do your best to remain a virgin. You are a virgin, aren't you? Love, John."
What he believed is that by assassinating the President of the United States, he would cement his relationship with Jodie Foster forever. And he actually wrote a note to her an hour before he left the hotel. And in that letter, he expressed the hope that through this act of assassination, he would be bound to her forever.
The news that the President of the United States was shot in order to gain the affection of a Hollywood star ricochets around the globe.
What went through my mind then was like, are you kidding me? How can somebody seriously think that Jodie Foster gave them the signals to do this, or that it was okay to do this? Look, I've been in love with people, but I never thought that, like, you know, by taking out a president, I would get their attention and they would marry me.
The Jodie Foster that your film fans and maybe John Hinckley thought he knew, and the real Jodie Foster. What? Can you talk to that?
Well, I never noticed there was a difference until today. And I imagine it's something that I'll have to be aware of in the future.
Though incarcerated and isolated from the world, Hinckley finally gets his wish. He makes an impression on the woman he fantasized over for years.
Do you think he did it for you, as he is reported to have said?
I don't think anything. That's, it's quite a supposition.
She definitely knew who he was after this. There was no bigger person to hit than the President of the United States, and he did it for her.
March 31st, 1981, John Hinckley Jr., a sad, lonely, and deranged psychopath, has achieved a level of infamy by firing a half-dozen bullets at the President of the United States in the hopes of attracting Oscar-nominated actress Jodie Foster. Stuart Johnson is appointed by the court as the public defender for John Hinckley.
I'm never going to reveal anything that my client, John Hinckley Jr., told me.
Johnson is a client to represent and needs to get to him ASAP. Strangely, he can't seem to track Hinckley down.
One interesting thing that happened in the high-rise FBI field office that I think was purposeful, I'm not saying this out of paranoia, the agents that took me supposedly to the correct floor where Hinckley was, we would go up, we would get out on the floor, then the agent would say, whoops, this isn't the right floor, and then we would go to another floor, and then we would go to another floor. I think that they were stalling for time. The more time that the agents could be with John Hinckley and ask him whatever they wanted to ask him, the better for them. So finally, this charade ended and we arrived on the right floor of this high-rise building. And I said, yeah, but where's my client? I want to talk to my client. I mean, the atmosphere was quite intense. My physical impressions of John Hinckley Jr. on that first meeting were that I was impressed by the fact that his eyelids were half shut. And of course, I wondered why that was. I suppose It was from the shock of the whole situation and having been beaten. He was very quiet. He was not a smart aleck. He was respectful. He just seemed like a pudgy, slightly goofy-looking guy.
The government charges Hinckley for attempting to assassinate the President of the United States.
It was very exhilarating for me to be appointed to and be briefly involved in representing John Hinckley. It would be to anybody. You'd have to be a zombie not to be tremendously exhilarated.
Hinckley's public defender Stuart Johnson is replaced when his family hires a very expensive and prestigious legal team. Hinckley pleads not guilty by reason of insanity.
In those days, the burden, once you made that claim, and it was based somewhat on fact, I guess, like examinations, then it was the burden of the prosecutors to prove you were sane at the time. And Hinckley went to trial, and it became a trial of experts. Like, the facts of what happened were a very small part of the case. And it was the defense experts who said Hinckley was crazy, insane at the time, elements of schizophrenia, all these things. And the prosecution witnesses said, no, this was premeditated. He wasn't insane.
In 1982, John Hinckley is found not guilty by reason of insanity and sentenced to St. Elizabeth's Hospital.
That became an outrageous decision throughout the United States in many sectors, and the law subsequently changed in 1984 because of, in a sense, misplacement of burden in the federal law at that time.
Do I think that if the case were tried today, that a jury would reject the insanity defense for Hinckley? Not necessarily, because the act itself and the alleged motive for it were so bizarre that that's an act of insanity. It's almost the definition of insanity.
After spending decades in a secure mental hospital, in 2016, Hinckley is released from St. Elizabeth's. He's ordered to live with his mother in Virginia and abide by strict release conditions. But all the years in treatment may not be able to help his difficult condition.
One of the most enduring and problematic personality disorders to treat is narcissistic personality disorder. And that was the discharge diagnosis for John Hinckley Jr. After spending more than 30 years in treatment. One of the analogies I use in describing pathological narcissism is an inflated balloon. And an inflated balloon may look quite large and very solid, but it's very vulnerable to being pricked. And when it's pricked, it deflates very, very rapidly. So there's a great vulnerability there. A balloon that's only partially filled with air, that has a much more realistic appraisal of itself, is not vulnerable to pinpricks. In other words, the skin is much more resilient. These individuals are thin-skinned.
Chances are he won't commit any new crimes. Of course, you never know.
I think John Hinckley and this event in 1981 changed history as much as if he'd been successful.
Hinckley's sinister plot and violent actions appear to have tremendously impacted the way Jodie Foster deals with the public.
While Hinckley was in jail, Jodie Foster maintained a fascinating career. She went on to make big hits like Contact. She took more time off. She directed a number of films. What she's done that I think is most remarkable, though, is that she has really kept a distance between her public life and her private life. We know very little about Jodie Foster, considering that she's been a big star for decades.
I think that she's come out of it with a clear head and hopefully with sane outlook on things still, you know. I think she's become a little more reserved and more private, and that's okay.
I think you can draw a straight line directly from the Jodie Foster-John Hinckley interaction directly to today, where celebrities tend to be a little bit more standoffish. The gates around their homes are a little higher. They don't answer the front door anymore.
Did Hinckley ever show any remorse? Well, let me put it this way. I think I know what the answer is, but I don't want to say what the answer is.
And in a sense, he accomplished what he set out to do, that there was a joining of their names historically.